Welcome back to Spirits in the Shadow. This story, inspired by events that went viral on the Hong Kong internet just a few years ago, centers on a bustling shopping complex in Shenzhen, a popular weekend destination. But what most shoppers don't know is that the building sits on the site of a former infectious disease hospital. Security guards and night shift workers have reported hearing faint, mournful whispers coming from the empty changing rooms. We're going to delve into the chilling truth behind these claims. Subscribe and stay tuned to find out what really happened in that mall after dark. Leo was an ordinary man defined by the ache in his feet. His world was the polished floor of a sprawling electronics store in Mong Kok, a space he paced for 10 hours a day, 6 days a week. He wasn't chasing a grand dream or building an empire. He was simply trying to make rent. The job paid the bills, but it took its payment from his body, leaving his lower back in a constant state of protest and his leg muscles tied in tight, angry knots. He was just one of millions in Hong Kong, a face in the crowd working a life that was more about endurance than enjoyment. His purpose for heading north was just as simple: relief. The cross-border city of Saman had become his sanctuary, a place where luxury was cheap and comfort was affordable. These trips, once or twice a month, were not exotic vacations. They were maintenance for the soul and body. For the price of a single disappointing dinner in Central, he could get a 2-hour massage that would melt the tension from his shoulders and make him feel human again. It was a pilgrimage of practicality. He and his friends, Ben and Alex, weren't thrill seekers. They were just regular guys on a budget, traveling for the simple, universal pleasure of feeling good. The environment of the trip was a familiar ritual. It began on a Friday evening, the exhaustion of the work week still clinging to them as they piled into Ben's aging sedan. They joined the slow-moving river of red and white lights inching towards the border, a shared exodus of people seeking an escape. The border crossing itself was a brightly lit, sterile space of organized chaos. The stern faces of immigration officers, the percussive thump of passport stamps, and the low hum of anticipation were all part of the normal rhythm of the journey. Once they crossed into Saman, the atmosphere shifted. The city greeted them with its usual chaotic energy, a symphony of buzzing neon signs, the aroma of street-side barbecue mixing with car exhaust, and the murmur of 1,000 different conversations. It was a city built for visitors like them, promising round-the-clock entertainment and accessible indulgence. They arrived late, just after 9:30 p.m., and their hunger was sharp. They ate a quick dinner at a bustling noodle stall, the steam from their bowls fogging the cool night air. Fueled and ready to relax, they followed Ben's tip to a newly opened massage parlor. It was grander than their usual spots, a massive multi-story building with a lobby that gleamed under the light of a huge crystal chandelier. It was impeccably clean, impressively stylish, and, most reassuringly, very crowded. Families, couples, and other groups of friends filled the plush armchairs in the waiting area. Attendants in crisp uniforms moved with quiet efficiency, pouring tea and guiding guests. Everything about it felt safe, legitimate, and completely ordinary. There was nothing in the polished marble, the soft music, or the polite smiles to signal that they had just walked into the last normal moment of their lives. Without a second thought, Leo followed her. The initial hallway, softly lit and smelling of lemongrass, soon gave way to a series of narrower, more functional corridors. The further they walked, the more the light seemed to recede, as if being swallowed by the walls themselves. A few overhead bulbs flickered erratically, casting long dancing shadows that played tricks on the eye. The gentle spa music faded, replaced by the low, insistent buzz of faulty electricity. There were no more voices, no more sounds of the bustling front area. It was just the soft, almost imperceptible shuffle of her slippers on the tiled floor and that grating hum. This was surely just the staff area, the utilitarian spine of the building hidden behind the luxurious facade. Leo reasoned that the private rooms must be tucked away in a quieter, more isolated section of the facility. It made sense for a high-end establishment to prioritize absolute tranquility for its premier guests. The flickering lights were probably just a maintenance issue they hadn't gotten to yet. The audience, however, feels the shift not as a transition to exclusivity, but as a descent into neglect and isolation. Every sputtering bulb is a warning flare. Every meter of silence is a measure of the growing distance from safety. He was walking away from the known world, one step at a time. He watched the woman ahead of him. She moved with a strange, gliding economy of motion, her posture perfectly erect, her pace unwavering. She hadn't looked back once to see if he was following. Leo cleared his throat, intending to ask how much further, but the sound died in the oppressive stillness. The air here was different, cooler, heavier, and devoid of any scent. He rationalized her silence as the mark of a consummate professional, trained to be unobtrusive, to create a space of pure quiet for the client. But her silence wasn't peaceful. It was a vacuum, pulling all the warmth from the air around them. To an observer, she wasn't a guide. She was an escort, her focus not on hospitality, but on delivery. The first real seed of doubt, a cold and tiny thing, took root in his mind. They passed a series of identical, unmarked wooden doors. Each was plain except for a small, dark symbol etched just below the handle, a circle with a vertical line cutting through the top half. It was an odd detail, a touch of the arcane in this otherwise sterile environment. Leo supposed it was some kind of internal classification system, a stylized way of marking rooms. He was, after all, in a foreign country. Their aesthetic choices were bound to be different. Yet the symbol didn't feel like a room number. It felt ancient, imbued with a meaning he could not grasp but could instinctively feel. It was a brand, a mark of ownership. Signs are only meaningless until you learn their language. By then, it is often too late to heed their warning. In that moment, the first premonition flared, sharp and sudden, a primal instinct screaming that he had made a grave mistake. The woman's hands worked their way down his spine, each vertebra a knot of ice under her touch. The cold wasn't just on his skin. It seemed to sink deeper, a penetrating chill that settled in his bones. Leo tried to take a deep breath, to chalk it up to poor circulation on her part, but the feeling was too unnatural. It was a dead cold, like touching marble in a crypt. She began to hum again, the same eerie, decades-old Cantonese melody. It was a strange ancient tune, a steady, monotonous loop that vibrated through her icy fingers and into his back. Leo kept his eyes squeezed shut, trying to focus on the promised relaxation, but the combination of the relentless cold and the haunting music sent a tremor of unease through him. He opened his eyes, catching a glimpse of her in the dim light. She remained with her back to him, her face obscured, her focus entirely on her task, as if he were an object, not a person. The tune was no longer just a hum, it was a dirge. "Could you maybe warm your hands up a bit?" he asked, his voice sounding strained even to himself. There was no reply. The humming continued, unwavering, and her frigid fingers pressed harder into the muscles of his lower back. The intensity was building. It felt less like a massage and more like a procedure, a slow, methodical draining of his own warmth. A new, faint scent reached him, something metallic and earthy, like damp soil or old coins. He shivered, not from the cold, but from a primal sense of wrongness. This wasn't right. Nothing about this was right. When the session finally ended, she simply stepped away without a word. Leo sat up slowly, feeling strangely weak and profoundly cold. He watched her tidy her station, her back still turned to him, the low hum a constant presence in the quiet room. He dressed quickly and went to the front desk, hoping the bright lights and normal human interaction would dispel the lingering dread. A young man with a friendly smile greeted him. "Everything was to your satisfaction, sir?" "Yes, mostly," Leo began, trying to sound casual. "The woman in room 4, though, she has incredibly cold hands, and she hums constantly, a bit distracting." The receptionist's smile faltered, replaced by a look of genuine confusion. "Room 4. That's May. Are you sure? All our clients say her hands are incredibly warm. It's her trademark. They call her Hot Hands May." Leo stared. "No, they were like ice. And the singing." "Singing." The receptionist shook his head, now looking concerned. "Sir, May is a deaf mute. She hasn't made a sound in the 5 years she's worked here. Perhaps you fell asleep and were dreaming." Leo felt the blood drain from his face. He shook his head, speechless, the memory of the cold and the clear, unwavering melody suddenly becoming terrifyingly vivid. He paid, his own hands trembling, and walked down the hallway toward the room he'd booked for the night. As he fumbled with the key, he thought he heard it again, faintly, from behind a closed door down the hall, the ghostly echo of an old Cantonese song. The manager, a man whose professional demeanor was cracking like old paint, fumbled with a ring of rusted keys. Each scrape and click in the lock seemed deafeningly loud in the tense silence of the hallway. With a final, reluctant groan, the door swung inward, releasing a stale, cloying wave of air thick with the smell of decay and dust. The room was a time capsule of neglect. A thick blanket of grey dust coated every surface, from the skeletal frame of the bed to the warped wooden dresser. Cobwebs, heavy and intricate, draped the corners like macabre decorations. It looked as though no living soul had stepped inside for half a century. Yet, there on the grimy, threadbare mattress lay Leo's phone, its screen gleaming unnaturally in the gloom. As Leo stepped forward to retrieve it, a guttural creak echoed from behind them. The heavy wooden door slammed shut, plunging the room into near-total darkness. The lock clicked with a horrifying finality. Panic flared instantly. Leo's friends began pounding on the door, their shouts muffled and useless. The manager let out a choked gasp, his flashlight beam trembling violently, casting frantic, dancing shadows across the walls. That's when the sound started. It wasn't a whisper, but a low, wet, guttural humming that seemed to vibrate up from the floorboards, through the soles of their shoes, and into their bones. The air grew impossibly cold. Leo spun around, his own phone's light now on, and pointed it towards the source of the noise. In the far corner of the room, a shape was coalescing from the shadows. It was the woman, the lady who had led him here, but her form was horribly wrong. Her body twisted and elongated, her limbs stretching to impossible lengths like cooling taffy. Her kindly face from before melted away, revealing a sunken, skeletal visage with hollow sockets where her eyes should have been. A silent scream seemed permanently etched onto her features as her jaw unhinged, impossibly wide, releasing a piercing, electronic shriek that vibrated the very air. The manager collapsed, whimpering in sheer terror. One of Leo's friends was backed against the wall, paralyzed by fear. The ghost drifted forward, not walking, but floating just above the dusty floor. Its movements were jerky, unnatural, like a corrupted video file. With a flick of its elongated wrist, the old dresser was hurled across the room, splintering into 1,000 pieces against the wall, narrowly missing them. Leo was frozen, his phone still in his hand, its light illuminating the horror before him. The creature was now directly in front of him, its eyeless sockets boring into him. A frigid, decaying hand reached out, its fingers tipped with jagged, yellowed nails. It wasn't reaching for the phone, it was reaching for him. He was utterly powerless, cornered in a room that shouldn't exist, facing a creature that defied reality, its chilling shriek the only sound in his world. This is where the footage cuts out. We don't know what happened to Leo or his friends. If you have any information about this hotel or have experienced something similar, please comment below. Like and subscribe for more updates as we try to piece together what happened in that room. The words hung in the air, heavy and cold. "Dude, your neck. What happened?" Leo's fingers traced the raw, jagged lines on his skin. There was no pain, only a profound and terrifying numbness. One look at his friends' pale faces was enough. The dare, the bravado, the thrill of investigating the abandoned villa. It all evaporated, replaced by a primal need to flee. "We're leaving. Now." The command came out of Leo's mouth, tight and strained. No one argued. They scrambled for their jackets and bags, a frantic, silent ballet of fear. Every shadow seemed to stretch, every floorboard creak sounded like a footstep behind them. The drive away was a blur of streetlights streaking past the windows. Leo sat rigid in the passenger seat, one hand clamped to his neck, the other gripping the door handle. He didn't dare look in the rearview mirror, terrified of what he might see looking back. He had a suffocating certainty that they weren't just leaving a place, they were being allowed to leave, and that was a far more terrifying thought. He had walked out of that room, but he hadn't come out alone. He knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that he had barely made it out at all. The next morning, the sun did little to burn away the lingering dread. The scratches remained, a web of angry red welts. A trip to an urgent care clinic only deepened the sense of isolation. "Looks like a severe allergic reaction," the doctor said, peering at his neck with detached professionalism. "Maybe you brushed against some poison ivy." He prescribed a hydrocortisone cream that did nothing. The scratches weren't an allergy, they were a brand, a claim. Weeks turned into months. The raw redness of the marks faded, but they never disappeared entirely. Instead, they settled into the skin as thin, silvery scars, almost invisible in the daylight. But Leo felt them constantly. They were a permanent part of his anatomy now, a map of his terror. The lost time was worse. An hour and a half of his life had been scooped out, leaving a void his mind couldn't fill, a black hole of missing memory that gnawed at him. The true consequence, however, arrived with the night. Sleep offered no escape, only a different kind of haunting. He'd wake up in a cold sweat, the phantom feeling of fingernails dragging down his skin, startling him from uneasy dreams. Often, he'd find himself standing in front of the bathroom mirror, tracing the faint lines on his neck. As his fingers passed over them, a strange, unnatural heat would bloom beneath the skin. A dull, persistent burn, like a dying ember refusing to be extinguished. It was a constant reminder. He had survived the night, but he had not escaped the consequences. The house was miles away, but its mark was on him, a permanent burning signature from the other side. Leo's desperation led him not to another clinic, but to the quiet, incense-filled halls of a temple near his home. The rational part of his mind, the part that had earned him a degree and a stable job, screamed that this was absurd. But that part of him had no explanation for the time he couldn't account for. The phantom itch that no cream could soothe, or the unnerving, faceless memory of the therapist. He was operating on a different kind of logic now, the ancient, instinctual fear that had pushed him to seek a different kind of medicine. An old woman with eyes that seemed to hold the wisdom of generations listened to his story without interruption. She nodded slowly, her gaze fixed on the faint silvery lines that still crisscrossed his back. When he finished, she didn't question his sanity. She simply asked for the date of his appointment. Upon hearing it, her expression tightened. "You went to her on the day of the wandering souls," she said, her voice a low hum. "The most yin day of the month. The veil is thinnest then. You did not find a clinic, you found a memory." She explained that decades ago, the area had housed a healer, a woman renowned for her knowledge of herbal remedies. During a terrible fever that swept through the community, she worked tirelessly, but ultimately lost her own children to the sickness. Consumed by a grief so profound it anchored her to the spot, she died not long after, her spirit trapped in an endless loop of failure and regret. She still tries to heal the living, but from across the veil, her logic is twisted, ghostly. Suddenly, the red flags from Leo's experience became signposts on a terrifying map. Every piece clicked into place with horrifying clarity. The therapist never showed her face because, in her grief, the spirit had lost her own identity. She was no longer a person, but an embodiment of sorrow. To look her in the eyes would be to see the abyss, to break the fragile illusion that allowed her to interact with the living world she so desperately clung to. The missing time was not a lapse in his memory, but a consequence of stepping into her domain, a pocket of reality where time itself was warped by the sheer weight of her tragedy. For Leo, it felt like an hour. For the spirit, it was an eternity of reliving her failure, a loop she had unwittingly drawn him into. And the marks, the guaiwan, were not a simple rash. They were the physical proof of her spectral touch. The old woman explained that they were ghost scratches, the lingering residue of a spirit's energy on a living body. The spirit, in her ghost logic, was trying to pull the sickness from him, to succeed where she had once failed. The phantom pain and itching were the chaotic side effects of her world colliding with his. The woman lit joss paper, the smoke curling towards the ceiling like a silent prayer. She dropped dried herbs into a basin of steaming water, their scent sharp and cleansing. "You must wash this memory from your skin," she instructed. As Leo bathed in the herbal water, a strange coolness replaced the persistent itch. Over the next few hours, the angry red welt softened, the silvery scratches faded, and the pain finally ceased. The physical torment was over, but the question remained, colder and more permanent than any mark on his skin. Who or what had he met that night in the room with no windows? What do you think really happened to Leo in that Hong Kong apartment? Was it a momentary lapse in sanity, or did he genuinely stumble into a dimension not meant for the living? The phenomenon he experienced, known as hitting the ghost wall, or guidaqiang in Chinese, is a terrifyingly common concept in Asian folklore. It's a form of spiritual disorientation where a ghost or spirit traps you. Victims report walking in circles for hours, unable to leave a small area or finding themselves in impossible architecture, endless hallways and rooms that defy logic. It's as if reality itself is bent by an unseen force, making escape feel hopeless. Leo was lucky to get out with just a mark, a chilling souvenir from a place that doesn't exist. Have you ever had an experience like this, or heard a similar local legend? Let me know your theories and share your own stories in the comments below. If you crave more chilling tales from around the world, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell. You won't want to miss what's coming next.